So, some of you may be familiar with Bernie Sanders, the Bernie Sanders attacks. Actually, a lot of you are probably familiar with them, with the attacks that are coming from the mainstream media. And one of these arguments that are used against Bernie Sanders is that he is supposedly pro-NRA, the National Rifle Association. And recently, you guys obviously heard that there was 3 separate shootings, mass shootings. I think they all pretty much constitute as mass shootings that occurred. One was in Gilroy, California, which is near San Jose in the Bay Area. Another one was in Dayton, Ohio. And the other one was in El Paso, Texas. And these all had multiple deaths. I think the lowest was like 8 or 9. The highest was 20, I believe. I think the El Paso one was 20. And those all apparently constitute as mass shootings. And so, obviously the debate regarding guns, regarding mass shootings has come up. People are going at it, and they're understandably angry and upset, and they're, trying to find ways to fix the issue. But specifically when it comes to Bernie Sanders, people like to go after him and nitpick things and bring it up and say, well, this is the position you had at one point. Do you believe this now? And is this something is this something you're going to explain? And are you going to clarify your statement? So all that bullshit. So I wanted to read this piece from the Washington Post, which is historically and infamously gone after Bernie Sanders and criticized him and smeared him multiple times. And they address kind of Bernie's past in how he supposedly was elected by the NRA. And I just wanted to read you this piece, and it's going to give you obviously a much better idea of how, for those of you who may not know, it gives you a better idea of how they like to smear him. So this is an opinion piece, and the title is "The NRA Helped Elect Bernie Sanders. Why Won't He Admit It?" And this was actually a post that was made, an article, that was written for a Vermont newspaper. It's a weekly newspaper. It's called 7 Days, but the Washington Post they decided to post it on their thing, on their publication. So let's check out the body of the article here. It says, after a pair of mass shootings last weekend in Texas and Ohio, Senator Bernie Sanders announced his support for a gun buyback program, declaring, "The American people are sick and tired of the NRA determining gun policy in America." Considered it the zeal of a convert. For most of his political career, Sanders has been skeptical of federal gun control. "Everything being equal, states should make those decisions," he told me in March 2013, after the massacre at Sandy Hook Elementary School. "There's nothing wrong with changing your mind, particularly when the underlying facts change, but Sanders and his allies have been oddly reluctant to acknowledge a shift. Perhaps that's because doing so would undermine the central argument of his 2020 presidential campaign, that he's been right all along and everybody else is just catching up. Sanders wants credit for fighting economic inequality before it was cool, popularizing Medicare for all, and opposing the Iraq War from the start. But he refuses to take responsibility for Congress's and his own inaction on gun control. At the Democratic debates last week in Detroit and 2 months ago in Miami, Sanders claimed he lost a 1988 race for Congress because he ran on a platform of banning assault rifles. It's true that Sanders told Vermont gun groups in 1988 that he backed a ban on semi-automatic rifles and that the NRA endorsed the Republican who beat him, Peter Smith, but there is little evidence to suggest that Sanders campaigned on the issue or that it played much of a role in his loss. In fact, he told the Burlington Free Press that year that gun laws are a local control issue and should not be changed. And while Sanders is quick to bring up his 1988 defeat, he rarely mentions his 1990 win, which came with help from the NRA. Soon after Smith took office, the freshman Republican reversed himself and sponsored a bill banning assault weapons. Vermont gun groups were apoplectic sorry, tough word there, and called for his resignation. Throughout the 1990s campaign, Sanders deftly exploited the rift. Though he, too, supported an assault weapons ban, he promised hunters he would always be straight with them. That fall, the NRA spent between $18,000 and $20,000 on anti-Smith ads. Bernie Sanders is a more honorable choice for Vermont sportsman than Peter Smith, NRA executive Wayne LaPierre wrote his members. Sanders won the race and kept his promise. He was an occasional ally to the NRA, repeatedly voting against the Brady Bill, which mandated waiting periods and background checks, opposing funding for gun violence research, and voting to protect manufacturers and retailers from lawsuits. So I just wanted to comment quickly before we move on here, before I read the rest of the article here. But when it comes to repeatedly voting against the Brady Bill, it points out. So people just say, "Oh, he was against the Brady Bill. He was against the Brady Bill." But when they, luckily this writer, he got into the details of why he supported the Brady Bill, and he said it says mandated waiting periods and background checks. Now, from what I understand, regarding Bernie Sanders' position on why he opposed the Brady Bill is because he believed that the waiting periods for people who want to purchase a gun was too long. And I believe like the Brady Bill, I would think, was pushing for 5 days. He was pushing for like 3 days or something. So he was against the bill. And, this is something people constantly bring up, but that's the context of it. And Bernie has never been against background checks, but he could. I think his main issue with it was the waiting period being too long. It could have been even longer, because 3 and 5 days didn't sound like too much. But I don't know. I'm not an expert on guns, but maybe that's the issue he took. But however, the point is that that's the reason he took issues with that. And you got to remember, he is from the state of Vermont. The state of Vermont has almost, honestly, the lowest, I would say, some of the probably top 5 lowest number of gun deaths per capita in all of the United States. So just in the state of Vermont, among all the other 50-something states, 50 states we have, he is against. I'm sorry, he's the gun death rates in that state of Vermont is the lowest, and it's one of the lowest for sure. And this is something that obviously Bernie, he sees that, he knows that, and he's put this out as his argument as to why he has supported the the rights of gun owners and allowing people to purchase guns and not being fully anti-NRA, because at one point the NRA was decent until they started getting into bed with the gun manufacturers, and that's the biggest issue, and that's something Bernie has always spoken out against, and that's something he's spoken out multiple times now. And by the way, when it comes to the ads that were used against his opponent back in 1990 when he was running for Congress, that's something that, listen, it's not like they were giving him. It's not like the NRA was giving Bernie Sanders money. They say $18,000 to $20,000 were spent on ads against his opponent. It's not like they gave Bernie money and said, "Oh, here's some money because we love you so much." No, they were running ads against Smith, and they were saying how great Bernie is. But that doesn't mean that Bernie Sanders was in cahoots with the NRA, And if they helped elect him, it's not like they helped elect him because he's like some pro NRA guy that's like the Republicans are and have always been, essentially, and that he's like whatever, like I said, they're in bed with the gun manufacturers, right? He's never been like that. He's criticized the gun manufacturers, and that's something that Bernie has always been clear on. Another thing that should be pointed out is that when it comes to protecting gun manufacturers and retailers from lawsuits, that's a little bit, from what I know, it's a little bit the kind of the way that argument is framed as far as voting to protect gun manufacturers, that's actually not correct from what I know, because when you use, because they say retailers too, but I'm saying when it comes to the idea of what gun manufacturers are, because this is something that Bernie Sanders dealt with in 2016, and it probably didn't really help him when he was facing Hillary Clinton, because she was so anti-gun control. So anti-gun, so she was very pro-gun control, and Bernie, he explained that the reason that he voted to protect these so-called gun manufacturers, when in reality, it was referring to the mom and pop stores, the mom and pop shops that sell guns. He said that it wasn't right, because what he was against, he says it wasn't right that the gun stores that sell guns legally, with background checks, with that waiting period, all that stuff, and then, so those gun shops that get sued, smaller gun stores too, not like huge big gun stores, you're not going to like some big ass store that's run by a rich asshole, not like that. It's small, mom and pop gun shops that sell these guns, and they give it to somebody that passes a background check, goes through the waiting period, and then commits a mass shooting. He didn't feel it was right for those people to be sued, because they're doing their job by legally selling a gun to somebody. So that's like using the logic of, somebody goes and buys a Toyota from a Toyota dealership and then goes and runs over a bunch of people with that Toyota, does a hit and run or runs over a crowd of people. So what are you going to do? You're going to blame Toyota? Even though it was the driver that was using that car, he could have used any car. He could have used a Honda or a Toyota or any other kind of car. And it doesn't really matter what the car was. In this regard, it doesn't really matter what it doesn't matter if the person ended up buying it from this store or that store or whatever. The person committed the crime after legally purchasing the firearm. So if you're attacking, if you have an issue with the obviously the kind of the selling of the gun in general, that's a different issue. That's a different conversation. That's a different issue. You can have that conversation separately. That could just be between people that are just anti-gun in general, regardless of where you get it from. But when it comes to purchasing guns from a specific dealer, and they do their job and they follow the rules, it's understandable to protect those people that are selling those guns illegally. So if you're mad at that, then you're just mad at the wrong person. You're mad at the wrong people. You're mad at the wrong, you're taking issue with something that shouldn't be taken issue with, in my opinion. But that's the reason why Bernie Sanders was against, he was against kind of the bills that, the legislation that was going to sue the gun manufacturers, retailers. But you have to understand, when they say gun manufacturers, it's not talking about the same corrupt gun the corrupt, kind of greedy gun manufacturers that are in bed with the NRA today. Bernie is against them, but he's just referring to the gun manufacturers in the sense of the people that sell the guns, the retailers. And it seems like the attacks that have been used on him have used that term, retailers and gun manufacturers, like they do in this article, have used it in conjunction as if they're referring to actual gun manufacturers who are corrupt. But no, they're talking about the people that sell guns in a little store, and they go through the whole same process and do all the right legalities and all that stuff. So if you're mad at those people, you're just you're delusional, and you're going after the wrong people, in my opinion, and in the opinion of Bernie Sanders as well. Continuing on with the article here, it says he also honored his commitment in 1994 to vote for an assault weapons ban. But as the frequency and severity of mass shootings increased over the next 2 decades, Sanders continued to maintain that the federal government ought to avoid regulating firearms. Quoting him, it says, "In my view, decisions about gun control should be made as close to home as possible at the state level." He said after a July 2012 shooting at a movie theater in Aurora, Colorado. Now, I don't know. I mean, I think states' rights, again, when it comes to something like a state like Vermont, again, like I said before, Vermont has very, very low gun crimes. People, when they make the issue, when they state that the issue should be like states' rights, and should be like a states' right issue, and just like that specific state should deal with it, I think that's a perfectly fine argument when it comes to the selling of just like non-automatic or semi-automatic rifles. And when it comes to just to regular handguns and just, nothing that's like, that's like kind of like a mass murder type weapon, I think it's important that those mass murder type weapons should, I think even Bernie has voted. He's voted on an assault weapons ban. They refer to them as assault weapons ban 3 times, and because he doesn't like the existence of assault weapons, and assault weapons are the ones that are used in these mass shootings. Now, if you're referring to handguns and stuff like that, that's a little bit different because those aren't able to be used in mass shootings as much because they don't kill in masses as much as a assault rifle would do, and it's understandable to look at that in states' rights, but I believe that states' rights should be addressing just handguns in general. Assault weapons shouldn't even be able to be purchased by regular people. I just don't think that's right because those are the ones that are involved in these mass shootings. But handguns, people have handguns. Sometimes they want to have them for protection. And when it comes to certain states like Montana and, South Dakota and Vermont and I don't know, just throughout any kind of like rural type area, those kind of areas have guns, and they don't have them for shooting, mass shootings. Trust me, those are not the places that have mass shootings majority of the time. And I think the debate should be, I think the idea of like a states' rights issue should be considered, and I don't think that's a problem because at the end of the day, you can't just put a ban on all weapons in every single state all over the country and expect people to be okay with that. Because it's not one of those issues where every single state is the same. They're not. They're different, So I agree with that when Bernie says that. Now, if he's still making that statement, I don't know. But I agree with that, and I feel like he's only not making that statement because he knows that the Democratic base, obviously, and a lot of progressives are against that. They don't agree with him on that. But I agree with him on that. So that's just my take. Continuing on here, it says, in my interview with Sanders after the Sandy Hook shooting, he said it was more important to address mental health than the availability of firearms, adding, "This is not one of my major issues." Yeah, that's not a very good way to put it. However, I do believe that mental health matters are important when it comes to these kind of mass shootings. I think that's part of it. I don't think it's the only thing. And, Bernie Sanders made a statement. He made a statement where he said that this is a mental health issue, but he also made it in conjunction with a bunch of other things that he said. It's not just mental health issues. And I agree with him. I don't think it's just a mental health issue, but it is something that needs to be addressed. You need to address multiple matters that go into, multiple factors that go into why something happens. It's not just one thing or the other, So I think he's perfectly fine in saying it is a mental health issue, but you can't say it's not one of your major issues. And then, he apparently said that in 2012 after Sandy Hook. You can't say that then and then change your mind, 8 years later and say, say that something, say it's all of a sudden it's so important. No, you have to address these issues equally, and sometimes even more important than the other things. And by the way, Bernie Sanders the reason why Bernie Sanders mentions the whole mental health issues is because Medicare for All is a big issue for him, and he feels that mental health treatment should be covered by Medicare for All. So he ties it in with Medicare for All, and I think that's very smart because mental health is definitely an issue. When it comes to PTSD, that's an issue. When it comes to CTE, so like people that kind of like, for example, the people that are football players and sometimes even soccer players, people that have suffered big time head trauma. He wants all those things to be addressed, by kind of by a Medicare for All system, and I think that's very, very good. I totally agree with him on that, and that's something that he should definitely push because that's an issue right now for many Americans. It says here, Sanders has since embraced federal gun control, and during his heated race against Hillary Clinton in 2016, he disavowed his previous positions on gun violence research and manufacturer liability. While the senator from Vermont isn't the only rural Democrat who's done an about-face on the issue, others have been more forthcoming about it. Montana Governor Steve Bullock was an avowed gun control opponent until last summer when he declared his support for universal background checks and an assault weapons ban. During last week's debate, he noted that he had been personally impacted by gun violence when his 11-year-old nephew was shot to death on a playground in 1994. That's sad, huh? Yes, it seems like many times when these issues they affect that person specifically, that politician specifically, whatever it's gun matters or whatever. It seems like they definitely they gain much more of a perspective on addressing it better. Excuse me. So it says Senator Kirsten Gillibrand, Democrat of New York, had an A rating from the NRA when she represented an upstate New York congressional district not far from Sanders's. Soon after she was appointed to the Senate in 2009 and inherited a far more urban constituency, she embraced gun control and earned an F rating from the NRA. I didn't do the right thing, she told CNN this March, explaining that earlier in her career she had not cared enough about gun violence outside her district. Quoting Gillibrand here, it says, "I think that makes me a better candidate for president. I think it makes me a better person because if you don't have an ounce of humility to know when you're wrong, how are you possibly going to govern all of America?" That's a question Sanders might ask himself. So that's not... Bernie Sanders has not been the biggest advocate, if not, he's probably one of the least biggest advocates. He's not a big advocate for them at all, has never really been. Again, they want to frame it that way because, he got help that one time that he ran, and he just happened to win that race. And that wasn't even a time that they were he didn't even embrace their support. Back when in 1990 when he was running against Peter Smith guy that had won his seat, and then Bernie won it after him, and I guess they had faced each other multiple times in a row as far as every 2 years for Congress, but to claim that the NRA helped him win is just absurd. Just because they didn't like the other guy and they said some nice things about Bernie Sanders doesn't mean they helped him. Bernie Sanders is not specifically, his issues are not specifically, have never really been, as far as I know, have specifically catered to gun rights. But when it comes to Vermont, again, Vermont is the state with one of the lowest gun death rates in the country, and if you are a representative of a constituency, you have to represent your district, or in the case of Senate, your state, and you have to do what the people of that state want. You can't go into a state. He's not originally from Vermont. He's originally from Brooklyn, New York. Now, if he was in Brooklyn, let's say if he was a senator from New York, I guarantee you he would have said, yeah, I support a heavier, more stricter gun control. I support laws that would not allow people to get assault weapons, blah blah blah, all that stuff. So all the same positions that people in New York take, he would take the same exact thing. It depends on where you're from, and in my opinion, this is the most objective way to look at this matter. I'm not a Bernie sycophant where I'm just defending everything he does. I don't agree with some of his, some of the ways that he framed, his statements when it comes to, not caring about, this is not a serious issue for me, or it's not a main issue for me. That's not the way you have to put it. Everything is a main issue in this country. So he's had some missteps in that regard, but largely when it comes down to it, you have to represent your constituency, and you have to do what they want so that they don't vote you out, because otherwise he would just be voted out of that district because he was a congressman at the time, and I think they have an at-large district. They only have one congressional seat in Vermont, and it's totally understandable to represent that position when that's what the people in that state want. So if people are mad at him for representing his constituency, then what is he supposed to do? Then you would attack him for not winning any seats, for being an unsuccessful politician. But he's obviously been successful because he's representing his state, and he's never said he's pro NRA. He never said he loves guns, none of that shit. In fact, he has a D- rating from the NRA. So, and he's never had even close to an A+ rating, A or A+ rating. When Kirsten Gillibrand has that, see, that's the thing with Kirsten Gillibrand. She had an A rating. So why are you comparing that to Bernie Sanders? Bernie Sanders has had lifelong D- rating. So on average, his rating is not even close to an A. It's horrible. It's a horrible record. When you look at it from the mindset of a pro-gun person, pro-NRA type person, he's got a horrible record. They would hate it, and they probably do. And I guarantee you, one of the main people that are going to be hating Bernie Sanders and pouring money into Donald Trump in this election, if Bernie Sanders is the nominee, I guarantee you one of them is going to be the NRA. Watch. they're going to hate Bernie Sanders. Once this primary is over and once this election is over, they're going to despise Bernie Sanders, and Donald Trump being the the bitch boy that he is, he's going to bow down to Wayne LaPierre and all those assholes from the NRA, and they're going to hate it. They're going to love him for his his fawning support for them, and I don't think it's going to work out well, because people are sick of all these mass shootings. They're sick of all these people that are dying from for no reason, because a bunch of crazy motherfucking assholes want to go out and kill a bunch of innocent people. And we've had enough of it, and we need somebody that's going to not only represent people, but is going to do the right thing. And I believe, and progressives like myself believe, that person is Bernie Sanders.